Welcome, everybody. My name is Amy Burlando, and I'm here on behalf of Cows and Fish, and I'll be presenting Reconnecting Land and Water, utilizing beaver and process-based restoration to restore streams. I also want to introduce my coworker, Logan Peters, who's tuning in all the way from Montreal. She's our communications coordinator, and so she'll be helping me in the background. If you have questions, just pop them in the chat. And when we move on to the Q&A period, Logan will be moderating that. Also, at the end of the presentation, if you do have a question and it's easier to ask it live, just raise your hand up and then you'll have an opportunity to, rather than type into the box, you can chat with us. As mentioned, I am with Cows and Fish, and Cows and Fish is a not-for-profit that works with watershed groups, land users, and land managers to help mitigate human pressures on aquatic habitats through riparian stewardship. And so symbolized by two things that might seem contradictory to most people, Cows and Fish moves beyond the polarization and recognizes that as all things are connected by water, we need to work together to find solutions that benefit us all. And so it's not just about livestock management. With appropriate management and care, we can have productive and profitable landscapes that don't cause our watersheds to unravel. Riparian areas, those emerald green threads along the water's edge, sew the land and water together. And the content for this webinar has been developed as part of the Working with Beaver Collaborative, a partnership between Cows and Fish and the Miistakis Institute. So working with landowners, municipalities, industry, government, and non-government organizations, working with beavers enables the realization of positive watershed outcomes by promoting and supporting beaver coexistence. And so to place myself in this work and provide a bit of a context on where I'm coming from with this work, as mentioned, I said my name was Amy Burlando, and I'm the Provincial Riparian Specialist for Cows and Fish. I currently reside with my family in Calgary, Alberta, or Miistakis, named after the connection of the Elbow and Bow River. I was born in the Badlands of Drumheller, Alberta, on the banks of the Red Deer River. And I spent my teenage and young adult angsty years in Lethbridge in the coulees along the Oldman River. So I'm essentially a mixing zone of lessons and experiences on the South Saskatchewan River. And I acknowledge that this land is part of the Treaty 7 lands, the ancestral lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai Nation, shared with the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina and the Métis Nation of Alberta, the original caretakers of this place. So learning the truth and the history of this land and the work that we do to reconnect to the land and to give back are part of a journey of truth and reconciliation. And in the pictures here on the top, that's me walking through Waterton National Park in the southwest corner of Alberta. And this is through a previously burnt area, recognizing that even areas that have had disturbance can heal. And in the bottom here, this is, I'm here with my spawn, Willow and Rowan. And like I usually like to be by the water and hanging out with woody debris. So the land and water that we see here today looks quite a bit different than it probably did for our great-grandparents, and most certainly different than it did pre-colonization. So the streams that I grew up playing in, and now that my kids play in, are a result of over a couple centuries of clearing the land. So it's hard to imagine what normal or natural would even look like for most of us. And this environmental amnesia, as it's termed, or extinguishment of experience, means that how each generation experiences place is going to shift over time. And what we consider normal is actually based off of a shifting baseline. And unfortunately, for us and for our kids, that baseline is trending downward if you consider things like landscape and stream health. And so it's a bit of an imagination exercise to think about what streams would have looked like. Even the images that we have to go off of are all post-settlement, like this one here. But even then, if you look at this old image of Willow Creek, which is just over an hour south of Calgary, there's a lot more willows than today. And surely this is an indication that times are a changing. And it's not just this creek in particular. There's a lot of streams that look like this. And so this is sort of our new normal. And it might be what you picture when you think about what a stream looks like. A stream right up against a crop, a stream running through an urban stretch, or a severely downcut and dehydrated stream. So what happened? Dramatic changes occurred on the landscape with the removal of two keystone species, the beaver, who are the keepers of the water, and the removal of the bison, the keepers of the land. And it was the lure of beaver pelts that originally drew Europeans to North America. And during the first 2.5 centuries of the fur trade, the number of beaver trapped annually increased until beaver numbers dropped. According to the Hudson's Bay Record, over 4.7 million beaver pelts made it into auction houses in Britain from 1769 to 1868. And that's an astounding number, especially when you think about a lot of this was for hats. So despite surviving for the last 1.9 million years, making it through an ice age, major cycles of droughts and floods, our modern beaver was virtually eliminated by the fur trade and a few hundred years of intense hunting and trapping pressure. And as my mentor, Lauren Fitch, writes, the trade for beaver in the period of 1534 to 1869 stimulated the exploration and mapping of most of North America, irreversibly changing the lives of Native peoples, contributing to the economic base of early governments, and it led to the formation of the continent's first multinational corporations in the real sense, which laid the foundation for the development of Canada. And as Lauren says, this isn't bad for a 20-kilogram rodent. And this is the result. Coupled with the removal of woody vegetation, this had a big impact on our streams. So land management decisions over time have led to increased soil compaction and vegetation removal, which has led to down cutting or incisement. And that's a form of vertical erosion in the stream bed. So a stream in this condition, it drains too quickly and it drains too efficiently. So it lacks connectivity with its floodplain. It means that water will have trouble getting up and out onto the floodplain, which helps dissipate the energy or horsepower of the water, and it helps rehydrate the soils. And when it comes to supporting fisheries, there's a similar declining trend. This is an old picture of a fish harvest from a local stream, which is a pretty substantial trout harvest. And if you fast forward to today, Alberta's native trout populations are threatened, as are many other fish species that reside here. And freshwater biodiversity in general is declining rapidly in every major river basin on Earth. And this degradation is occurring more rapidly than in terrestrial environments. So for example, global wetlands are vanishing 3 times faster than our forests. So how do we bend the curve to biodiversity loss? Restoration. And what do I mean by restoration? Just like the human body, when parts of a system lose functional capacity, the ability to perform life-enhancing processes break down. For example, in the body, when your arteries are restricted within the circulatory system, we lose our ability to receive fluids and nutrients through the rest of our body efficiently. So the system has to actually work harder. And with increased loss of function, we begin to see complete processes breaking down. Well, this is also true at the scale of a watershed, where restricted or limited channels cannot deliver water and nutrients to and from the floodplain. When we reduce our idea of what a river is to a thin blue line on a map, we reduce our ability to understand a stream as a dynamic living system. So to restore the function in the system, we need to step back from that water's edge and look at the entire floodplain, that entire valley. Riparian areas, so those areas that I mentioned connect the land and the water, are critical spaces for river processes to occur. And these are things such as water balance, nutrient exchange. And so streams need to access their floodplains for the space for all these processes to occur. And in a sense, riparian areas are the kidneys of our watershed because they filter nutrients and they control the hydraulic pressure of the system. So when functioning optimally, riparian areas filter water, they hold stream banks together, they allow for water infiltration into the soil, which recharges our groundwater. They provide a source of woody debris, shading for the stream, and food and habitat for all the critters that live there that then participate in nutrient cycling through food webs. So just like the human body, when we refer to an area as healthy, we are meaning that it is performing all the critical functions needed to sustain the system. So when I use that term restoration, I mean returning function to a process or to a relationship between processes within a larger system. And sometimes all you need to do is look across a fence line to see the difference and to understand that one side of that fence line is going to function a little bit better and therefore be healthier when it comes to maintaining life-supporting processes and aquatic health. So at the scale of a riparian area, it's the interaction of water, soil, and vegetation that are critical for understanding function and therefore health. So the living and physical components interact with one another to create optimal structure and function. And if we scale out a little bit, this is the stream evolution triangle. And when trying to understand function and relationship at a watershed level, it's the interaction of geology, or the physical characteristics that create form through physical processes such as erosion and will determine resistance to erosion. Hydrology, so how nutrients and material, and particularly through water, is moved through a system. And that's indicates the system's ability to mobilize material, the horsepower which it moves. And then lastly, at the top of the triangle, biology, how living components interact to influence that both that flow, the hydrology, and the form, the geology. And on the inside of the triangle, you see some stages ranging from 0 to 8. And that is what Kluwer and Thorne refer to as the stream evolution model. And stage 0 at the very top, underneath biology, represents a basically undisturbed system, so the optimal system. And so at the top of this triangle, biology really helps uplift the entire system. And I'm going to explain this evolution model a little bit more in the next slide. So stage 0, the stream evolution model. As I mentioned, this was done by Kluwer and Thorne, and this is image itself is from a paper from 2014. And stage 0 at the top, as I mentioned, really represents that pre-disturbance condition. And so in this condition, the riverscape is characterized by multiple channels around vegetated or forested islands with high lateral connectivity. And these systems are very resilient to disturbance. So natural evolution through this system from degraded channels, starting through that stage 1 through sort of 7 area, occurs over a process of incising or down cutting, like that degraded channel I showed you at the start. Widening, so the channel starts to widen as it heals. A grading, which means filling in and lifting of the bed. And lastly, anastomizing. And so if you look at the diagram on the right, you can see the time scale on the outside. This is a simplified version of this process presented by Joe Wheaton from, and this particular diagram comes from the low-tech process-based restoration design manual. And you'll see the logarithmic scale on the top. This process takes a really long time to naturally heal. And beaver can speed up that process. So beaver are nature's ecosystem engineers and pivotal in creating healthy, complex stream systems and wetland complexes. Given the 10,000 plus years of dam building and repeating, old beaver ponds become filled in with sediment and continue to have profound effects on shaping our watersheds and providing fertile soils. So the sediment that's captured in the ponds broadens the stream valleys over time and provides rich deposits of soils. And this bed buildup of sediment elevates the stream beds, provides rich soils for lush vegetation. And then as the vegetation grows, the deep roots of those plants helps prevent further downcutting of the stream. And you can see this process in the diagram moving from A to F, starting with a deep channel, and a beaver builds a dam across it, and then coming across to B here. As the beaver dams blow out, you can see the channel starts to widen as the water flows around. Again, the beaver move in and plug it up again. And as that water slows down, there's a deposition of rich soil. So when the beaver dams blow out again, eventually you're left with the state F here, where you have several channels and wetland complexes all interacting. You have a lot more surface area of water and a lot more groundwater. So the missing pieces here are beaver and wood. Beaver promote that biological uplift that I was talking about, that the top of that triangle. So with added structure from the wood and from beaver dams, you create obstructions that force hydraulic diversity. And this leads to more diverse aquatic habitat. So this diagram is from a paper by Laurel and Wool, and it's on beavers' influences on streams. And it's a conceptual model of the feedbacks that are maintained within a river corridor by the presence of beaver and wood. And so beaver create these rich beaver meadows, which are segments of river corridor that are generally have high geomorphic diversity. They help attenuate flood events. So you have more hydraulic diversity, and they have increased biodiversity. And this persists long after the beavers even move out. And if you look at the top portion of the diagram, you see a positive feedback loop where the active beaver meadow, you have increased backwater and overbank flow, which is great at supporting floodplain and wetland habitats. So lots of trees and riparian plants moving in, which increases beaver food and habitat, which increases the beaver, which increases the ponds, and on and on and on in a positive way. And so here we have it. Maybe this is that missing reference condition, that stream that, you know, we might not be as familiar with today, but probably a lot of our streams looked like this in the past when we had more beaver. And look at all that water that holds. And so as the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So coexisting with beaver and keeping them on the landscape is a proactive way to maintain the benefits that beaver provide. But we do understand that that's not always easy, and there are some drawbacks, such as loss of our favorite trees and flooding of infrastructure that come with having more beaver on the landscape. Here's a couple pictures of tools that you can use to try to minimize that impact. So on the left there, we have some tree wrapping that can be done to help save your favorite trees. And on the right, that is a pond leveling device, and that can be used, it's placed within a dam, and it can help set the height of the water so that you minimize flooding. And so the Working with Beaver Collaborative recently published a beneficial management planning document to help support beaver coexistence through utilizing these different tools, like the two that I just mentioned, and other strategies to minimize some of the negative impacts that beaver can cause. And this is just an example of the decision tree at the beginning of the document. It helps a user decide what tools will be most effective for them, and which is most appropriate in their settings. So we can add fiber to the watershed by managing land use, by planting trees, and by keeping beaver. But when we lack beaver in an area, or we lack the woody vegetation and water depth to sustain beaver, we can mimic some of those processes that they initiate and encourage them to return. If you build it, they will come. So this design manual here, this is the low-tech process-based restoration of riverscapes design manual from Utah State. And the concept is aimed at restoring processes in structurally starved riverscapes through low-tech and low-cost structural additions, such as in-stream woody debris. And this technique is primarily meant to be used in wadable streams, which actually account for the majority of our streams and also a lot of our really important headwater streams. So the term riverscape, and I've used it a couple times throughout, this is comes from the process-based restoration manual as well, it refers to a connected floodplain and channel habitat that together make up the valley bottom. So again, we're talking about that entire floodplain as an active zone. The system includes interconnected riparian, groundwater, and channel habitats, and all their associated living communities that are sustained by physical and biological processes that vary over space and time. So the entire space is important to allow for the essential functions to take place. It's the process space. The goal of your restoration then would be to improve the health as much of that space as possible to set the right trajectory for healing in a self-sustaining system. So in these images from the low-tech process-based restoration manual, you can see the defined lines outlining that entire valley bottom. So again, we're stepping outside of that normal idea of thinking that our river is just the stream, and we're considering that whole process space. So also listed in these images are the principles behind low-tech process-based restoration. So there's 4 riverscape principles and 6 restoration principles. And so I'm not going to go through each one and explain them all, but I'll provide a brief overview of what they're referring to. So number 1, streams need space. And we talked about this as that floodplain being that space for all the processes that are needed to keep them healthy to occur. Structure forces complexity and builds resilience. Again, that's that biological uplift that I was talking about in the triangle, meaning that obstructions like wooden dams, they force that hydraulic diversity that then creates the diversity of habitat. 3, the importance of structure varies. How much of these obstructions or structure in the system is going to depend on the size of your valley. So keeping that in mind when designing restoration projects, that they're not all meant to be the same. Number 4, inefficient conveyance of water is healthy. Water isn't meant to just blow through our streams. It causes severe erosion. Water is meant to move in that sinusoidal curve. So in through a meandering stream is meant to be inefficient. And when it's inefficient, it actually has the ability to deposit some of the material that it's mobilized upstream, and again, to rehydrate our floodplain. So moving on to the restoration principles, it's okay to be messy. I hope my kids didn't hear that. Nature is one place. I will say that it's okay to be messy. If you've ever seen beaver complexes, beaver are incredibly messy. Number 6, there's strength in numbers. This comes with the mobilizing a really strong team to build to build these things, but also meaning in building a lot. So that's why they're low cost, pretty low tech structures, so you can do a lot of them and actually have a, scale up your impact. 7, use natural building materials. A lot of these things, I mean, you're designing for failure here. If they fail, they're just natural material going back into the environment that they came from. Number 8 and 9, I kind of pair together. So let the system do the work and defer decision-making to the system. So sometimes we're working in these systems, we don't have all the information we might need, all the hydrology information. So we're using pretty low risk tools here. And the idea is using the stream horsepower to mobilize the material versus using diesel horsepower. And lastly, number 10, self-sustaining systems are the solution. So you're meant to build these and let the system maintain them. And that's something, the idea here isn't to keep coming back and spending years maintaining this. Hopefully beaver move in and they take over and the system becomes self-sustaining in that way. So one technique that I'm going to focus on for the remainder of the time here is the beaver dam analog, which are human engineered beaver dams. And so if you recall the image that I showed at the beginning of that really sad looking vertically eroded stream, or incised channel is the technical term we often use. This technique, the beaver dam analog, can help slow flow. It can help dissipate the energy of the stream and allow overland flow, rehydrating the floodplain and dropping out some of that nutrient-rich sediment back into the floodplain, plain. And over time, this actually starts to lift the bed of the channel upward. So there's two kinds of beaver dam analogs. There's postless, and you can kind of see a postless one sort of at the front of this image. And then in this diagram here, there is a post-assisted beaver dam analog. And the name is sort of self-explanatory. One has posts and one doesn't. And so this is the post-assisted beaver dam analog, and a couple different views of what this looks like. Again, these images are taken out of that low-tech process-based restoration design manual. You can get it on the Utah State University low-tech process-based restoration website. There is a ton of free resources, so I would encourage you to definitely go there. There's all kinds of webinars that they have recorded, all slide materials, workshop exercises that you can try at home and get really familiar with these techniques. And so the first step of this would be obviously determining the height, the crest elevation that you want for your beaver dam. And that's going to be based off of how much water you want to have spilling up and over the bank and how much process space you're trying to return to the system. So you're going to install the posts. Usually this is done with a post pounder. Depending on how hard your substrate or ground is, you might need a hydraulic post pounder. If you're working in an area with high levels of deposition, you might get away with just a sledgehammer. You're going to trim, again, the post down to that desired crest level. You're going to weave through some willow branches and pack with substrate and fill material, much in the same way a beaver would do to plug up the flow. You're going to work in a willow mattress, we call it, and you can see on the downstream end of the dam. And what this mattress does is it helps prevent scour and erosion from the over dam flow. And then you're going to continue to plug up the BDA with mud, organic materials from the area, and then plugging up this the front portion, making sure that it's watertight. And I'm going to show a little video that Logan made for social media that explains how to build one of these. So that video that was made there, that was created during a workshop that was hosted by Trout Unlimited Canada and led by an engineer, Joel, with Cascade Waters Engineering. And it was done in a tributary to Wipers Creek, which is in the Ghost Public Land Use Zone, so just west of Calgary here. And the goal of this project was to naturalize a tributary to Wipers that had abandoned its natural channel and taken the course of an old trail. And so looking in this picture here, you can see essentially the channel has become a straight ditch and it runs dry in the summer. And so putting the channel back into what was the old channel wasn't really feasible given now infrastructure that is in place in the area. However, this is still like an important stream for native trout. And in fact, just upstream of this, there's some beautiful beaver dam complexes and West Slope cutthroat trout spawning. And then downstream of it is important habitat as well. So putting this back into a state where it holds water longer and there's overwintering pools for fish was really important to maintain this this corridor for fish movement and beaver movement. So the hope here now is that it holds water longer, that the beaver will move from upstream and maintain some of these. Here's another example, and this is on Jim Creek, which again, Trout Unlimited hosted a workshop on, and they hosted the folks from Utah State University that actually came here and taught several of us. It was an amazing opportunity. And so this stretch of stream is one on the Waldron Ranch, and it had been previously excluded from cattle, but still runs dry in a large section throughout the summer. So the BDAs here again will hold water longer and help willows regrow in this area. And the hope is, again, that beaver will move in and take over the job. This is an example of a BDA being built, and this was done in partnership with the Blood Tribe Land Management team. Again, similar goals is that we wanted to hold water longer in this system. And this is an example of a beaver dam analog, which was built by, again, Trout Unlimited Canada, our colleagues that have a lot of experience building these and have done some wonderful projects. And this one, again, is in critical habitat for native trout. Same sort of goals. The idea here is to hold the water longer. A lot of these streams, and King Bolt Creek here is in the Porcupine Hills, the headwater stream in the Old Man River. And so with the drought conditions that we've been experiencing, these streams are running dry a lot sooner than they used to. So techniques like this will again help hold the water longer, slow down that conveyance of water and the down cutting of the streams, and hopefully beaver return to these systems. They have a little bit more water to hide from predators, so they can return here and take these over and keep the water in the creek. And if you want an opportunity to build one of these, or several, because there will be several, do we have an opportunity for you? We will be leading a beaver dam analog build at the Ann and Sandy Cross Conservation Area, which is an important area within the Pine Creek watershed. And it has several natural springs, and it is the headwaters, pardon me, of Pine Creek. So Ann and Sandy Cross over the years have undertaken several projects to protect and conserve the water sources for the health of wildlife in the area, as well as for the larger ecosystem. And so this project will help elevate the water table to increase the floodplain connectivity. It'll reduce the impact of things like long-term droughts that we seem to be experiencing. It's going to help add more structure to the system. And the big goal here is to improve local beaver habitat to encourage the beaver to come back into this space. So if you want to help with some builds, October 10th and 11th, I'll be out leading a workshop on how to do that. And Sandy Cross is just the southwest of the city of Calgary. There's still lots of room. Lunch will be provided. This QR code here, if you scan it, I believe should take you to the registration link on Eventbrite. Otherwise, you can just pop on Eventbrite and Google it, or maybe Logan can put it in the chat box, the link for the registration sign up. And it would be great to have you here. As I mentioned, that strength in numbers. We're hoping to build about 20 of these to really have an impact in this area. So strength in numbers, the more people we have, the less work this becomes for me. So historically, Pine Creek supported an abundant beaver activity, as evidenced by the many derelict dams that are in this space, and also from historical anecdotes from the land manager, and he's been out on this parcel for about 40 years. And he said that when Ann and Sandy Cross Conservation Area was first established 37 years ago, it had over 50 beaver that called this area home. And however, due to the gradual loss of beaver throughout time in the watershed, and also some downstream barriers, there isn't many active beaver left in this space. And so despite Ann and Sandy Cross's hopes for the return of beaver to Pine Creek, they just haven't made their way back there. And so there's still some optimism here. One of the things that we're hoping to achieve by putting, like I said, about 20 BDAs into the system is that even in these dry conditions, we want to hold the water longer. There's a lot of springs coming into this space. You see it's in the foothills here. So with decent snowpack, there's a lot of runoff and access to water in the spring. So if we can hold that water just a little bit longer to create enough water depth so that the beaver can be safe. One of the things about beaver, I don't know if you've ever seen them move on land, but they're pretty awkward. So they build their dams so they have a safe depth of water to escape predators. So hopefully we can give them that safe depth of water. And one of the other goals here is with more water availability is regrowing some of their food source, the willows, so that we can keep the beaver here. And the hope is that in a few years, we can translocate some beavers into this space and they can take over the job. So it's very likely that our future holds much more variability in terms of climate and weather. And that includes both flooding and drought. And it also includes wildfire. Having beaver and their dams on the landscape may help us deal with some of this variability, at least in terms of having reliable water source on the landscape in dry times. Beaver dams can help reduce those flood peaks in times of too much water. And there's a lot of really cool work on beaver and wildfire mitigation as well. So beaver and beaver mimicry can provide an effective, natural, low-cost means for stream restoration and climate change mitigation. And that is all I have for you in terms of a presentation today. So thank you for tuning in for the presentation. If you want to get in touch with me, there is my contact information. Please send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions via email, or I'm going to stop sharing screen here and allow people an opportunity if they'd like. You can raise your hand, you can unmute and ask your question, or you can type it into the chat box. So I got a question here from Jessica. Will these beaver dams be beaver dam build at Sand and Cross be measured and monitored? Yes. So in this case, we have a really cool research project that's funded by the Rangeland Sustainability Grant, which comes from the Alberta Government. And we've put out some forage cages in the area where we're going to build the beaver dams. And also we're putting forage cages as a control site in areas where there isn't. And what the forage cages do is they prevent grazing animals from eating any of the plants growing there. So we're going to measure them at the end of a growing season, and we're going to see if having this extra water available from the beaver dam analogs, if that actually increases our forage capacity and productivity of the plants. So that's one thing that will be monitored. I was out there yesterday, actually, taking some pre-photos and putting in some benchmarks. So we'll be looking at visually some of the changes that are occurring. In other, not necessarily in the ones at Anna and Sandy Cross Conservation Area, but some of the other BDA examples that I showed there that have been done in Alberta, we're working with the Miistakis Institute, and they're sort of leading the research component of this, and they will be installing some level loggers to look at some of the changes in water availability. They'll be looking at some ways to measure greenness from LiDAR information. So seeing again if having BDAs on site is actually increasing the plant productivity. Other things that have been looked at are groundwater increases as well. Again, another question from Jessica. Are there studies or resources that show function of riparian areas with high beaver activity in fire systems? So some of that research that I was mentioning on the impact of beaver dams in particular on mitigating wildfire, and they act as fire breaks, and also healing processes that occur after fire in areas, is from Dr. Emily Fairfax out of the US. She's got a super cool video of how this works. It's a cute little claymation type video of a beaver building a dam and the impact that has on stopping fire. And you could probably just look up Dr. Fairfax's work. She did come here last year when we had our beaver symposium and presented a lot of her research. As far as riparian area specific and the function on those. Over time, we have done a lot of what we call riparian health assessments, where we go out onto the land and measure, like I mentioned, the function of a riparian area to determine its health. And we've done some in spaces that had before beaver dam and after. So we do have some of that data to compare. Thank you, Logan. Logan has popped Dr. Emily Fairfax's website into the chat box for people that are curious about that. Like I said, it's pretty cool work that she's doing. And I think having beaver on the landscape, or even these beaver dam analogs, could be a really powerful tool for, I guess, helping the landscape heal a lot faster and preventing the spread of some of these out of control wildfires, pardon me. That's a really quiet group. I thought this might prompt some discussion. Beaver are kind of one of those love them or hate them type conversation pieces. So usually when you bring up the word beaver, people have a lot to say. But I guess if there's nothing else, I mean, I would encourage you, if you want experience and you want to help build, we got our beaver is an invasive species. No, they are not. Beaver are native to here. And as I mentioned in the history, there used to be a heck of a lot more beaver in Canada than there are now. And I know, like, for people that live in southern Alberta, we don't see as many, right? And we might be more interested in having more beaver because we have less water, versus I've talked to, folks in the northern part of the province who have a lot more beaver, aren't as water limited, so they consider them more as a pest. One thing I will say is they are managed and have been managed somewhat as a pest species. And I think that speaks to some of those negative impacts that they can have when they're on the space. And also that environmental amnesia. We're not used to having as many beavers on the landscape. So, even a few beaver can be too many for many people, in particular if they are eating your apple trees or they are flooding your road. But certainly in some cases, there isn't great data on how many beaver used to be here. But in some places, they say we're only at about 10% of what the population was. Do you need a permit to create these beaver dam analogs? Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't include it in the presentation, but absolutely you do. Creating these dams in a stream is considered an activity in a water body, as defined by the Water Act legislation here in Alberta. So you need a permit for an activity in a water body, and you do that through applying through the Alberta Government on their DRAS, the Digital Regulatory Assurance System. Because you're building on bed and shore, and the bed and shore is owned by the province of Alberta, technically you need a temporary field authorization, which is obtained through your local public lands officer. And I mean, sometimes I think the legislation part of it and the permitting can be a bit of a deterrent for people, but certainly, we went from having none of these structures really in Alberta, I want to say just over 5 years ago, to now a lot of those examples that I was showing you and more. So I think they are becoming a little bit more common. I think the regulators are recognizing what these are. And like I said, I have some funding to even research, some of the positive impacts that they can have on rangelands throughout the province. So I think the appetite to have these approved is more so there than it was before. And it's not really you want to build a dam. They're not large impoundments. Beaver dams are naturally leaky, so are these. So you're not holding back all the flow, just some of the flow, and you're just lengthening that duration that the water is on the landscape. Well, without seeing any more questions, I guess we can end this session a little bit early, which is fantastic. So you can take a lunch break, and I know I'm looking forward to mine. yeah, please do reach out if you have any questions, and yeah, come volunteer and help build beaver dam analogs. It's a lot of fun playing beaver for the day in the field. So thank you for tuning in. And again, we'll send up a follow-up email with some of these resources that we've talked about for people. And we'll also send a link of the recording in case you want to go back and review anything. You want more of my really quick voice. Thank you.